Picture this, right? It's the dead of night on the African savanna. The dry season has just snapped the landscape into this brittle, dusty wasteland. And sprinting through the dark is a supreme king, like a massive, dominant male lion. But he is running away.
Yeah.
He's leaving behind his territory, his pride, his entire bloodline, and his honor.
It's incredible.
Right. I mean, for a male lion in his absolute prime, yielding territory without a fight to the death is a choice that defies literally everything we associate with the whole, king of the jungle concept.
It completely shatters his identity. I mean, in the biological reality of the wild, a dominant male without a territory doesn't just lose real estate.
Yeah.
He basically ceases to exist as a functional force in that ecosystem.
Wow.
The sheer humiliation of flight is, well, it's almost always a death sentence of a different kind.
It's a chilling image, and it sets the stage perfectly. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking this breathtaking factual account documented by Apex Truth.
It's such a wild story.
It really is. We're exploring one of the most astonishing, rule-breaking survival stories ever witnessed in the wild. If you are listening to this, just prepare to have your understanding of animal instinct, resilience, and memory completely dismantled.
Oh, absolutely.
We are talking about an exiled king who makes a series of choices that flat out defy every evolutionary rulebook we have.
To really grasp how unnatural his choices were, we first have to understand the magnitude of what he actually lost.
Right.
Because we look at a lion pride and we just see a group of animals.
Yeah.
But a pride is a civilization.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It relies on this highly sophisticated power structure built on hierarchy, blood ties, and collective memory. And the absolute bedrock of that civilization is territory.
Because the territory serves as everything, right? It's their bank vault, their supermarket, their cemetery, and, well, their nursery.
Exactly. Everything happens there.
Yeah. And the king we are tracking today is a lion named Kovu. For 3 years, Kovu and his brother ruled the Yada Plain. They won that land in this earth-shaking battle, securing a prime expanse of the savanna. It was a fortress. But nature basically despises a monopoly, right? Especially when the dry season hits and desperation starts creeping across the plains.
That seasonal shift is so crucial. As resources plummet, the invisible boundaries of territories are constantly tested. So 4 dark-maned, yellow-eyed nomad lions arrived from the north.
Just appearing out of nowhere.
Right, and they had been violently expelled from their own lands just weeks prior. They weren't just wandering aimlessly, They were deliberately tracking the borders of the Yada Plain, looking for a structural weakness.
I always wonder how animals actually assess that weakness. Like we say they make the calculated math that 4 beats 2, but I mean, they aren't doing division in the dirt.
Right.
How do these nomads actually gauge the strength of a resident pride?
It's basically a sensory audit. They literally listen to the vocal signatures of the roars at night. A lion's roar can carry for 5 miles, and every single voice is distinct.
Wait, really? Like a fingerprint?
Exactly like a fingerprint. So the nomads sit in the dark, just counting the unique voices. They also map the patrol routes by smelling the concentration of urine and pheromones on the borders.
Oh, wow. So they're building a whole map.
Yeah, and over a few weeks, they realized the patrol gaps on the Yada Plain are widening because there are only 2 resident males trying to cover this massive, shrinking area. Once they mapped that vulnerability, they struck.
And from the Apex Truth footage, it wasn't even a battle. It was a targeted execution.
It was.
They moved in this highly coordinated night ambush, completely surrounding Kovu's brother before he could even posture to defend himself. In a matter of minutes, a 3-year reign was erased.
The precision of that attack is terrifying. Kovu hears the commotion and he sprints to help, but he is too late. He arrives to the metallic smell of his own brother's blood in the air, just staring down 4 pairs of amber eyes in the darkness.
And that's when he makes the choice to turn and run.
Right.
But this is the exact moment the narrative pivots from a standard nature documentary into something completely inexplicable. As Kovu flees into the blackness of the savanna, 3 cubs follow him.
We really have to pause and emphasize the sheer biological anomaly of this moment.
Please do, because it's insane.
These cubs were only about 10 to 11 months old. Socially and biologically, cubs belong with the lionesses. Following a fleeing, disgraced, lone male into the night is a logical impossibility.
It's basically a guaranteed death sentence.
100%.
And if you're listening to this, you're probably thinking what I'm thinking. Why on earth didn't he just abandon them?
Right.
From a purely Darwinian perspective, cubs are loud, they are incredibly slow, and they require massive caloric intake. A lone male is going to struggle just to feed himself out there.
Exactly. He could always survive, find a new territory years later and sire more cubs.
Yeah, taking them on this journey makes zero sense on paper.
It defies the cold, unforgiving math of the savannah entirely. For the cubs, it was a choice between two terrors. Staying behind meant immediate slaughter.
Because the new males would kill them.
Right, the incoming nomads instinctively kill cubs to erase the old bloodline and trigger the females into heat. But fleeing with a disgraced father, that's terrifying too.
I can't even imagine.
Yet, in a suddenly hostile world, he was the only anchor of a familiar scent. And for Kovu to stop, look at those exhausted cubs with their eyes reflecting the moonlight and actually allow them to follow. It's an astonishing override of self-preservation.
So they begin this journey into a living purgatory, and they eventually arrive at the Tisown National Park. Specifically, they end up in this brutal strip of land referred to as Death Row.
The name is incredibly accurate, too. Death Row is essentially the dumping ground for the savannah's exiles and nomads. It lacks the safety of a claimed territory, meaning it has a hyper-concentrated population of hostile predators. You have overlapping clans of hyenas, solitary leopards, and other aggressive roaming male lions.
So it's basically the worst place you could possibly be.
In Tisown, you aren't at the top of the food chain anymore. Every step is a gamble between being the predator and being the prey.
So now Kovu has this nightmare scenario. He has to hunt to survive.
Yeah.
But to hunt, he has to move stealthily. And to move, he has to leave these 3 clumsy, noisy cubs hiding in a landscape swarming with hyenas.
The anxiety must have been staggering.
It had to be. And his solution isn't some, heartwarming display of fatherhood. He is brutal with them. He literally uses his massive snout to shove these exhausted cubs forward, forcing them to keep moving and growling if they dare to stop.
He had to be brutal. By forcing them to match his pace, he was severely compromising his own stealth and speed. But the most staggering subversion of wild behavior happens after he actually manages to secure food.
Oh man, this part blew my mind. So Kogu manages to take down an isolated animal nearly 2 kilometers away from where they had been hiding during the heat of the day.
Right.
And the golden rule of the wild, the unbreakable law of the savannah, is that the strongest eats first. Always. But Kovu drags the meal back and lets the cubs eat.
He essentially allows the biological hierarchy to collapse.
Yeah.
In an environment that routinely punishes sentimental behavior with starvation, Kovu is deliberately sacrificing his own caloric intake, his own immediate physical strength to keep these 3 young males alive.
I want to push back on our own awe here for a second, though.
Okay, go for it.
It's incredibly tempting to look at this through a human lens and call it unconditional fatherly love. But nature doesn't do Disney movies.
True.
Could it be that Kovu subconsciously viewed these cubs as a highly calculated long-term investment? Like, it reminds me of a desperate startup CEO pouring his absolute last pennies into a risky R&D department.
It's a great analogy.
Right. Because it hurts now. But he knows it's his only conceivable way to eventually recapture market share. Is this just extreme inclusive fitness at play?
The biology perfectly supports your R&D analogy. I mean, even if Kovu wasn't consciously mapping out a multi-year business plan, his biological drive recognized a fundamental truth.
Which is?
Nature demands a return on investment. The caloric and physical energy he expended to keep them alive was astronomical. But if they survived, they wouldn't just be his sons.
They'd be an army.
Exactly. They would become a coalition. He was quite literally starving himself to forge a future army.
Wow. And surviving day to day was one thing, but Kovu had a bigger problem. He couldn't protect them forever in death row.
No, eventually they'd have to fend for themselves.
Right. If they were going to survive, he didn't just need to feed them, he had to teach them. And his method of teaching is where this story goes from incredible to absolute genius.
It really is unparalleled.
He gave them a master class in survival based on obsessive observation.
Because necessity forces adaptation. The learning curve had to be accelerated and intense. Every time Kovu hunted, it was a live, high-stakes demonstration. He taught them to trek, not by making them wait safely, but by forcing them to participate in the silent, primitive act of following a scent profile through hostile brush.
But he didn't just teach them by successfully catching prey. He used a tactic that seems completely counterintuitive. He would purposefully fail his hunts in front of them.
Yeah.
How does an apex predator intentionally fail without just looking clumsy?
It's all about manipulating the mechanics of the hunt. Lions rely heavily on wind direction and closing the distance before that final explosive sprint.
Yeah.
So Kovu would intentionally position himself upwind so his scent would carry directly to the herd. Or he would launch his attack from 30 meters out instead of the optimal 15. He was deliberately breaking the geometry of a successful ambush.
It's literally like elite military special ops training.
It really is.
You aren't just taught how to shoot a target on a flat range. You were dropped into live fire scenarios where your plan is guaranteed to collapse.
Exactly.
By watching the prey bolt, because Kovu attacked from too far away, the cubs were learning the exact spatial boundaries of the kill zone. They learned how wind direction betrays you. He was showing them the architecture of failure, so they knew exactly how to avoid it.
A witnessed failure is infinitely more educational than an ignored success. To intentionally waste vital energy and let a meal escape when you are living on the edge of starvation is a massive, calculated risk.
It's almost unbelievable.
It shows a level of social transmission that borders on pedagogical teaching. I mean, he was modifying his own behavior at a severe cost to himself, specifically to facilitate learning in another mind.
And the results speak for themselves. Incredibly, researchers from Apex Truth observed the oldest cub spending 40 uninterrupted minutes tracking a ground bird. He stalked it for nearly 100 meters in absolute silence. He missed the bird by half a meter, but the tactical foundation was completely flawless.
And it paid off quickly.
Right, because by the time he was 18 months old, he took down his very first wildebeest.
Bringing down a wildebeest at 18 months requires a phenomenal combination of stealth and explosive, coordinated power.
Yeah, that's not a small animal.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But the psychological development is even more impressive because by age 2, that same young lion successfully bluffed a fully grown leopard off a fresh carcass.
Okay, I have to know how a 2-year-old lion luffs a leopard. What does that actually look like on the ground?
It's pure game theory. Leopards are solitary predators, right?
Right.
So if a leopard breaks an ankle in a fight, it can't hunt and it starves to death. Therefore, they are intensely risk-averse. The young lion exploited this exact psychological vulnerability.
So he didn't even fight it.
He didn't attack at all. He puffed up his mane to appear larger, aggressively charged just enough to trigger the leopard's risk-aversion instincts, and made this theatrical, terrifying display. He convinced the leopard that the caloric reward of the carcass wasn't worth the mathematical risk of an injury. He won the meal without spilling a single drop of blood.
That is profound intelligence. Over 3 excruciatingly slow African years, these cubs completely transformed. They developed highly specialized roles.
Yes, they became a unit.
One brother became the embodiment of pure speed and impact, like the hammer of the group. Another became a master strategist, anticipating the prey's escape vectors and positioning himself to block them before the ambush even started. They were a fully formed, lethal machine.
But those 3 years in the Inferno took a really heavy toll on Kovu.
Yeah, he wasn't the same.
Not at all. He was no longer the arrogant, pristine king of the Yata Plain. He carried these jagged, raised scars across his neck from surviving hyena ambushes in the dark.
His mane had also changed, right? It had grown much denser and turned incredibly dark at the tips.
Which is a massive biological signal. A darker mane indicates higher levels of testosterone and overall physical resilience.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it actually absorbs more heat, making it physically harder to carry, so only the absolute strongest males can support one. He radiated the dangerous, heavy gravity of a survivor who had lost everything and clawed his way back.
So the question for this newly forged coalition was no longer if they could survive, it was when they would use the weapons they had spent 3 years sharpening.
And that answer finally arrives.
It does, on a dusty late afternoon. They are trekking, and they inadvertently cross an invisible line in the brush. It's marked by scraped earth and the faint, degrading scent of territorial urine. It is the border of the Yata Plain.
The sensory flood for Kovu in that exact moment must have been just overwhelming.
Because drifting across that border on the wind is a familiar, low-frequency rumble.
Yeah.
Roars.
Yes.
The original Darkmane invaders from 3 years ago are still there. Well, 2 of them are. Half of the invading coalition had vanished over the years, likely victims of the Savannah's implacable logic, but the remaining 2 had aged into comfortable, authoritative rulers. They marched around the plain as if they had built it.
For Kovu, smelling the exact ground where his brother was executed, and hearing the voices of the usurpers, this was no longer a standard territorial dispute. It was deeply, viscerally personal.
The new coalition gathers at the border, and there are no roars of challenge, no warnings,
No.
just total, eerie silence. Kovu steps over the border first, walking slowly toward his past, with his three massive sons fanned out right behind him.
And when the clash finally happened, it completely broke the rules of predator combat.
It was an absolute nightmare of dust, tearing claws, and teeth-seeking jugulars. But the detail from the Apex Truth account that really stops you in your tracks is the pacing of the battle.
Right.
It was prolonged, it was agonizing. Kovu and his sons had the numerical advantage and multiple opportunities to deliver a quick, fatal strike to the aging invaders, but they didn't. They drew the violence out. It was a deliberate, agonizing retaliation.
Which completely defies behavioral logic. In the wild, efficiency is survival.
Because you don't want to get hurt.
Exactly. Prolonging a fight wastes precious energy and drastically increases the risk of a fatal injury. Deliberately drawing out a confrontation implies an emotional or psychological drive that completely overrides basic survival programming.
Which makes the ultimate reveal of this battle so staggering. The three sons, who were fully grown, highly lethal, and more than capable of ending the fight in seconds, suddenly step back. They intentionally disengage, they form a perimeter and allow Kovu to deal the final, fatal blows to both of the invaders entirely alone.
It is a breathtaking moment of deference. They weren't stepping back out of fear or exhaustion. They recognized that Kovu needed to be the one to finish it.
Are we witnessing an actual animal code of honor here? Or is it simply a psychological acknowledgement that Kovu needed to close the loop on a 3-year trauma?
It's likely a profound mix of both, you know. The memory of their 3 years in death row literally rewrote the muscles in their bodies into a language of survival that those comfortable invaders couldn't even comprehend. The sons recognized that Kovu was the sole architect of that survival. Stepping back and letting him strike the final blow wasn't just respect, it was the ultimate act of allegiance.
And so the dust slowly settles over the Yada plain. The three young males are bleeding and panting, but they are standing.
Yeah.
Kovu stands over the fallen invaders and lets out a roar that echoes against the African horizon, reclaiming his dirt, his sky, and his kingdom. The humiliation of his flight 3 years prior is entirely erased.
Which brings us to a harsh but brilliant truth about the natural world. Nature is neither fair nor cruel. It is strictly exact. It extracts the precise, painful price required for survival.
Kovu wasn't weakened by his defeat on that first terrifying night. He was stripped of his royal comfort. That defeat and the brutal exile that followed forged him into something absolutely necessary.
He became a version of himself that the invaders couldn't possibly defend against.
It's a powerful parallel for human resilience, too. Comfort rarely breeds innovation.
That's for sure.
Sometimes being violently pushed out of our familiar territory into our own version of death row is the only way we forge the specific, vital skills needed to actually rule our environment.
The obstacles aren't in the way. The obstacles literally are the way.
Yeah. We've just explored a 3-year odyssey of survival that culminated in a highly specific, energy-wasting, prolonged retaliation.
A multi-year plan driven by what looks exactly like a thirst for vengeance.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. If wild animals are capable of executing a multi-year strategy rooted in retaliation, what does that reveal about the sheer depth of animal consciousness?
It's a heavy question.
It really is. The next time you look at a predator, whether on a screen or in the wild, ask yourself, are you just looking at hardwired biological instinct? Or are you looking at a memory that never ever forgets?